Hello and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. This time it is going to be my top 5 most anticipated features or just general things for Warlords of Draenor. Now it's worth saying that these are not really the top 5 things that will improve the game by the greatest degree. It's more just things that I'm really looking forward to. Anyway, let's start off the list with number 5, and number 5 is Garrisons. Yeah, I know maybe some people would be surprised that this isn't a little bit higher because I have been saying a lot of positive things about Garrisons, and honestly that's a reflection of how strong some of the other features are in my opinion, but also just how I think that maybe the launch Garrisons will be a tiny bit lacking in comparison to, say, the end Garrisons that we will have by patch 6.4. I think this is a feature that they're going to be adding quite a lot to, and over time it will definitely get more interesting. So why do I think this? Well, sometimes when you log into the game, you get this feeling of there not really being much of worth to do. Now, the garrison feature basically will directly combat this. You can always go to your garrison, send your followers off on missions, perhaps check on all the different profession things and all those just general sort of things. We don't honestly have enough details of the specific garrison gameplay to say exactly what we will be able to do, but the idea is that it's something you'll be able to go and mess around with basically every time you log in. I think that's really good, and it adds more into that sort of daily ritual of cool things to do in World of Warcraft. Then also the follower system actually seems rather in-depth. They can actually take a lot of gear. Just looking at some of the BlizzCon slides, they definitely can take a lot, and hopefully this should lead to some interesting gearing, and then also the fact that some items will have bonuses to specific things. So you could have a sword that has, say, Orcbane as one of its stats, which would mean that that follower is better at doing missions against orcs. So overall, there should be a decent amount of depth in this follower system, especially with gearing, and I think that that should add a little bit more longevity to the garrison feature as a whole. Then I also like the idea of having limited access to some other professions, providing of course that it is well balanced. I like the idea of the mine, actually, and I know this can be applied to many other professions, but for the mine, just as an example, you could build a mine in your garrison, and then get a follower who's really good at mining. Maybe through a mission or something like that, you could get that follower a really nice mining pick, and that would mean that you can get X amount of ore every hour from that place. Now, first of all, this should have a really interesting effect on markets, and it will, I guess, actually add a bit of a revenue source for people who are not major profession people. Like, you could perhaps just have a garden and a mine and get some herbs and ore, really only get a few stacks a day, maybe only 1 or 2 stacks a day of each, but that should be enough to tide you over in terms of money. And I think just having a little passive source of income like that could be kind of interesting. And then the whole process of kitting out your characters so they can do those things effectively will also, hopefully, be a good bit of fun. Now, another thing is that I really wonder what will be involved with the missions system. Currently, you can send, well, not currently, obviously it's not out yet, but the current information that we have based in BlizzCon is you can send your followers out on missions like quests, which I think take half an hour, a scenario which takes 4 hours, maybe a raid takes a few days, or a dungeon only takes a day, something like that. And they will go off, they'll do the mission, then they'll come back. Now, first of all, that's pretty okay. That's not really crazy interesting in terms of gameplay. So perhaps I think they could expand this so that you could maybe get a special mission every once in a while that you actually personally do with your followers, in terms of a more in-game thing, and I think that would be very cool. Or maybe it would unlock some sort of cool event like your garrison being attacked by some enemy forces. Basically, I'd like the idea of there being little scenario sort of things woven into the mission system that spices it up. Ultimately, I think it would be a wasted opportunity if this just felt like a Facebook game, or maybe one of those systems in the Assassin's Creed games where you send off your trainee assassins for an arbitrary amount of time, then they come back with an item, or a certain set of money. If Blizzard can actually find a way of weaving gameplay into these garrison missions, at least periodically, I think it could be very good. Okay, then next, customizability features. I think that these are extremely important, and honestly, the feature could feel very impersonal and static if they aren't there. So overall, I would like raid trophies, PvP trophies, like a pet area, a stable, and then some like unlockable flair items that you could gain through perhaps rep, achievements, Ashram, etc. Basically, the more the merrier, but I definitely like the idea of there just being cool things you can unlock and place around or just around your garrison. So maybe you unlock a flag or a banner or a different kind of street lamp. Hell, there's a lot of stuff that they can do. And as time goes on and as we move from patch to patch, the art team could maybe just churn out some interesting items for Garrisons. I think that would definitely be nice. Still though, customizability is very important, and it is player housing. Well, it's expanded player housing, but one of the key things about housing is that it's a piece of the world that is your own. So I really think it's important that they reinforce that feeling of it being yours by allowing you to customize it quite a bit. Then finally, I think it could be rather interesting if the placement of buildings has some sort of effect other than just purely a cosmetic one. Like maybe you could play a little bit of kind of SimCity, like not micromanaging, but just intelligently building your base in a way that maybe makes sense. Although, of course, there would be a risk of there just being a cookie-cutter build, and that, I guess, would be kind of bad. Whatever. And then finally, there is some rather cool follower AI. Now, I'm not particularly excited with it for Garrisons, because honestly, I'm not convinced that it will lead to any interesting gameplay, but I am interested to see what other uses they will find for the new follower AI. Perhaps they could do some really cool pathing inside, like, I don't know, solo scenarios you can do with your followers, or little cool things like that. Overall, I just think it would be a nice system, and honestly, AI is something that can really make or break parts of a game, and more importantly, it can open up new opportunities. If their AI is good enough to have an NPC do something with a player, then it opens up a new kind of gameplay, and I think that could be a very nice feature. Okay, so coming in at number 4, we have Ashram. Why do I have this here? Well, because I really miss Warsong Gulch and Tol Barad. These were really fun things that you could do every 2 hours, and it was just kind of nice to be able to pop into a bit of content that was of an epic scale that actually involved a good bit of fun. Now, I've got to say, Tol Barad was not my cup of tea, because it just ended up being a bunch of Zergs running around the place. Though Warsong Gulch was something that... Not Warsong Gulch. Wintergrasp. Have I been saying Warsong Gulch? Ugh. In my bullet points I wrote WG. Wow, I'm really silly. Anyway, Wintergrasp. I really liked the idea of having the siege engines, and there's just something very cool and atmospheric about it. And sure, Wintergrasp did have its problems. The tenacity system wasn't really the perfect fix, honestly, and then it did also boil down into a bit of a Zerg at times, though the difference is that Wintergrasp was actually designed in a way that meant the Zergs were okay. It made sense to be having a giant fight outside the gate or something like that, so that was kind of cool. And now that that's gone with Mists of Pandaria, I really do feel like I'm missing something. And it's really a diminishing factor to the game for me. So it's really nice that this is going to be there. And of course, Ashram is constant. The battles there will last for days, so you'll be able to dip in whenever you want. This once again will help with that issue where you just sometimes log into the game and you don't really feel particularly jazzed to do anything. Well, the more things there are, I guess the more chance there will be of you feeling like doing one of them. And hey, the more the merrier, and then the more sort of spread out the content is, then I guess the less chance of people getting burnt out, which is quite good. Then also I think the old Alterac Valley system looked really interesting, where you had these giant 6-hour battles, so having something of that scale would certainly be very nice. The only issue, I guess, is that since it is randomly match-made, well, not randomly match-made, but since it's so drop-in, drop-out, I guess there is, nearly by definition, a lack of clear leadership. I'd imagine that back in the day in old Alterac Valley, the teams that did well were the ones that had a few people just kind of leading and telling people what to do and giving orders and sort of playing the tactical role. I would be very interested to see if Ashram will have some sort of system that would allow this. Maybe the game could recommend a place to go, or something like that. I'm not particularly sure, but if there is anything that they can do to prevent just these kind of large Zergs running around the map in circles, then it would certainly be quite good. Though Ashram will have multiple objectives. It's going to have a main siege and then some surrounding sub-objectives, so I think that should help break up the player base, especially if they emphasize the sub-objectives. One of the reasons why Alterac Valley is now just a straight rush is because the sub-objectives, like upgrading your troops and going to the mines, just don't really matter. So if they do matter, then hopefully Ashram will be a little bit more spread out and tactical, which personally is something that I find very exciting. Now, one thing though, we don't know about the rewards game for Ashram, and sure, it's going to have some PvP gear maybe and stuff like that. But really, beyond that, what will it have? Well, I'm hoping for mounts, transmog, cosmetic items, and then some garrison customizability options, and maybe titles, and achievements, all those various things. The more the merrier. I think Ashram has got to have more than just PvP specific rewards so that it can really capture a lot of the player base. Because I think that Ashram is really going to benefit from capturing a lot of the player base, just by design. So overall, the more we can get, the better, and hopefully Blizzard plan on releasing a really diverse amount of rewards. I have seen it recently on Twitter, I think it was Halinka, and he said that they understand that Ashram rewards are absolutely paramount, and getting them right is essential to the feature having a highly positive impact on the game. And then I think next, one slight little downer I have is that unlike Tolbarad and Warsong Gulch, Ashram isn't going to have an associated raid boss. This is a tad unfortunate because I did enjoy that whole dynamic quite a bit, but I guess that since there will be a good number of weekly world bosses, that should be a little bit of a diminished problem. Alright, let's move into number 3, and this is Harder Heroics and the Daily Challenge mode. Look, they're all dungeons, so I'm just going to lump these both into number 3. So first of all, you're going to need to do Proving Grounds to get into Heroics. This does indicate that a level of competency is needed. Then also, since there are going to be level 100 normal dungeons, this implies that the heroic ones can basically be a mini tier of gear higher, which means that the actual item levels and gear levels that the bosses are designed for will be a little bit higher. This in turn should mean again that they will be a little bit more challenging, and just combined with these two sort of indicators combined, this definitely suggests that they will be significantly more challenging than the Mists of Pandaria ones, and that does indeed line up with what Blizzard have said, which is basically that they will be harder than Wrath but easier than Cataclysm, and I think that's, in general, a good split. Cataclysm wasn't really looking for dungeon friendly, whereas I think that this could be just the right level of difficulty to be friendly to looking for dungeon, while still allowing for some decently challenging gameplay. So that should be good. And one thing that's also worth saying is that heroic dungeons are going to be the gearing path into non-LFR raiding, which means that all that one needs to do to get into LFR is normal dungeons. I think that this split is very beneficial to both sides of the camp, so that's definitely great. And then another good point about this is because of the higher item level, expectation and various things like that, this is going to allow for some more meaty content as soon as the expansion hits. Unlike in Mists of Pandaria, where you were done with heroic dungeons within a week or two, these should hopefully last for a month or two, perhaps even more, and I think that's definitely a good thing, which, well, really, for obvious reasons. And then for challenge modes, well, challenge modes are going to have a daily quest that will reward an epic item. We don't know 100% if it's going to have a definite drop rate or not, and then we also don't know what the exact item level will be. I do hope though that it will be higher than LFR since the content is much harder and will require more organization than LFR. Honestly, I would have this gear be perhaps just a little bit lower than the Warlords equivalent of flexible raiding. Overall though, I think it could be very good. And one important thing is that the item level reward for these challenge mode daily quests will actually increase from tier to tier. The reason for this is because, well, they want it to stay current, but also challenge modes are scaled, which means that their difficulty will not change from tier to tier. So that's great. You'll always get a source of really nice gear for those who want challenging 5-man content. And you know what? Okay, sure, it's not the full-blown mythic system that some of us would have wanted, in which bosses would have all had like new special loot tables and things like that, but I do think that it's a really good compromise between what we already have in the game and what I suppose we would like. It's a step in the right direction, and it's one that I think I will personally use quite a bit, and that's definitely quite fantastic. I mean, hell, think about it. On the first week of an expansion, when we all hit level 90, or so, level 90, level 100, I'll be able to go in with my guild and start doing hard content. I think that'll be really good. And then, just as a kind of supplementary thing to raiding, it will also, hopefully, offer some nice gameplay. Alright, so number 2, raid linearity. And I actually think that this is just going to be such a nice break from the Mists of Pandaria way of doing things. Basically, in Mists, especially with Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar, the raids were just a straight line with a lot of bosses. And Oh, that was annoying. And okay, yeah, it was great that the raid tiers were really large, and I think that was one of the real nice things about Mists. I think it had really solid raid tiers, but having so many bosses in a row, in my opinion, is just rather bad. You face the same pattern every night, which leads to burnout, and there's no real opportunity to spice things up. This can just lead to the raids feeling dull after only a month or two, which is not good, and I think Siege of Orgrimmar and Throne of Thunder are definitely the largest examples of this. So if we look into the Warlords raids, at least the launch ones, Blackrock Forge, or Foundry even, is going to be a little bit like the top end of ICC, where you have 3 different wings, which then move into a final boss. And then High Maul is going to be like the Firelands, where you will have, I believe it is 4 or 5 non-linear bosses. Actually, no, I think it's 5 or 6 non-linear bosses, which will then lead into the final one. Overall, this is fantastic. I think they were both great layouts for ICC and Firelands. What will this do? Well, it will lead to more variation, which should in turn lead to a little bit less burnout. You'll be able to do the bosses basically in the order that suits your raid the best. So if you're going into a certain raid night with maybe a different comp that doesn't favor a certain boss, well, that's fine. You can leave that boss to later when you will have a better comp. It gives you a lot more flexibility, and then also in terms of loot, you can do your runs in a way that kind of optimizes loot, which I think would be definitely kind of nice. So yes, overall, freedom is great, and this should keep raids from getting stale. As someone who raids and really, like, a raid tier is something that lasts me about 4 months or 5 months. If I'm doing the same thing every 5 months, then I will want as much variation within that experience as I can get, and hopefully more linear raids will lead to that. Now, it is important to note, though, that often the initial tier of an expansion is pretty varied. In this case, it's got 2 raids, and it's been like that for many expansions, but afterwards they just release single raids that are linear. Now, I really hope they don't do that. I hope that they either release dual raids, or perhaps have different wings of, like, new tiers be kind of separate raids, so maybe you could have one section of the Siege of Orgrimmar, another section, and they are both accessible at different points. So maybe if that whole Veil of Eternal Sorrows bit was its own raid, it was perhaps a little bit more fleshed out and non-linear, then that would just lead to less burnout, and I think overall it would be a more intelligent way to structure the tier, which would be important, just as long as we're not going through 15 or 14 boss long slogs. Blizzard, though, do understand that that's a problem. They've said so on Twitter, and that probably will not be an error that they will repeat. Alright, so we're on to number 1. This is actually something that may surprise a few people. Well, it will not surprise people who have been listening to the channel for a long time, because it's been something that I've been harping on about quite a bit. Number 1 is a more dark story. Mists of Pandaria was, in my opinion, too light, and I think there was too much dissonance between the serious elements of the story and the just kind of lulzy elements. Basically, when they tried to make everything feel more light-hearted and a bit silly in some regards, it really took away from the world building. Pandaria felt like a bit of a hodgepodge of weird themes, and I know that there were some overarching themes, but I just think that overall they didn't really manage to pull it together into a really nice, cohesive world that just felt good. Maybe just not to the degree that, say, Wrath of the Lich King did. I think Wrath of the Lich King was the perfect example, because every single plot line fed into the main Lich King story, and then even if you take Ulduar, well, Yogg-Saron was basically, in a way, behind a part of Arthas' descent into madness. But still, in Northrend you had 2 main plot lines. You had the Old God one, and then you had the Lich King one. And basically everything in there fed into that. Now, I know that with not Warlords, with Mists of Pandaria, most things did feed into the Shah, but I just think that the structure of the quests, the structure of the storytelling, and the order in which we were introduced to various elements didn't really lend itself too well. There were not many plot arcs that just continued throughout the entire expansion. It's not like the way that, say, you, I don't know, landed in the Howling Fjord in Northrend, in which you were introduced to the Vrykul, you're introduced to the Dark Irons, and then also to the Undead. Now, these were themes that carried through the whole expansion, whereas in MoP, you landed, you found out about the Hojin, you found out about the Water People, and the Shah, and then later on you found out about the Mogu, then at the very end you found out about the Klaxi. It was all just very jumping from theme to theme and story to story. Well, with Warlords having a more dark story, that does seem to be quite a bit more, I guess, just considered and condensed. It should just take away from that problem. Hopefully everything will feel very cohesive, and all of your actions throughout the questing experience will reinforce a common goal or theme. I think that's just extremely important, and if they do it right, it will just increase my enjoyment of the expansion so much. And I think that this overall darker story will inform the entire expansion on many different levels. The raids, dungeons, garrisons, etc. will all benefit from a more serious story. I think that more serious stories tend to lend themselves a little bit better to world building, especially in RPGs, so anything that takes place in a world which is more developed and feels stronger will automatically be a little bit more interesting. It should give more weight to your actions. I really hope that this does translate into an overall increase in my enjoyment. I can definitely say that based on the story of Shadow Moon Valley, which I will not spoil here, but you can find if you just Google, and then the stuff that I've seen in Frostfire Ridge, I'm actually quite pleased, and I'm very encouraged to see where they're going. Also, in terms of the quest structure, I think that they're really going to strike a happy medium between Mists of Pandaria, not Mists, between the more narrative, linear focus of Cataclysm and the more open-ended focus of some of the other questing experiences. I think namely the Wrath of the Lich King one. Wrath was at its best when you had a main story and then some side quests, because the side quests would offer you a decent bit of choice and a sort of breakup of pace, but then the main quest would really deal with a fun bit of story. Well, in Warlords, we're going to have a main story going out throughout every single zone, and then a whole bunch of optional side quests, which you will be able to take at your leisure. Or leisure even, I'm not American. Why am I pronouncing it that way? I've been watching too much television. Anyway, you get more choice, and that should be really nice. It should just make this questing experience feel a little bit more interesting, especially because it will lead to a hopefully enhanced player agency, which I think is extremely important in gameplay. Alright, so those are my top 5 reasons. What are your top 5 reasons, or just in general, what are the parts of Warlords of Draenor that you are looking forward to? I will, as always, do a reply video to this, in which I will feature some of the comments which I find to be particularly interesting or well thought out. So if you have something to say, do say it, and I will get back to you in a video. Anyway, that is it for today. If you enjoyed the video, please consider checking out my social media links and my Patreon page. And yeah, with that, I will see you next time.